What's up? What's up, everybody?
The Longevity Game podcast is on the air.
Yes. What's up, everybody? Preloading my pre-workout. Hope everybody's doing well. Put this right out. I love this thing. The Longevity Game podcast. Check this out. Somebody sent this to me. The Longevity Game podcast. A little sticker I can put on my car. I don't know if I will, but I'm thinking about it. Pretty neat, right? How is everybody doing? Man, this is going to be a fun episode. We're going to talk about some cool things, mainly about how your body can optimally recover after a workout using the right type of protein. And we're going to try to debunk some myths here, specifically whether or not it's, there's that 1 hour window, that you're supposed to eat protein after a workout, if that's actually a thing. And we're going to talk about your epigenetic aging versus chronological aging, and how working out can actually slow your epigenetic or your biological clock. Epigenetics, biological. All right. And we'll get into all that, right? But this is a cool topic. This is going to be a cool topic. And who's this topic for? Who's going to benefit most from this? It's people who really want, they spend time in the gym. They work out, but they're not seeing the gains that they want to see. Or maybe they want to they want to get more tips or more strategies that will help enhance their outcomes from the time they put into the gym. Other people who may be interested, and I think that should be most interested, is people a little up in age, right? Because as we age, specifically after, our 30s, we're aging about 1 to 2%. We're losing 1 to 2% of our muscle mass per year. And that equals to be about 10 to 20% of our muscle mass per decade. And that's like super important, because I talk to my patients about this all the time. Like, imagine how you want your life to live when you picture retirement. Like, what does retirement look like for you? Imagine, is it all these incredibly adventurous things that you've been wanting to do your whole life, but having a job and it's kind of pushed you back or set you back, and you haven't been able to do those things. And so you're really planning for retirement to go big. Well, what do you want your quality of life to look like? Because that's going to matter. The kind of stuff that you do now is going to set you up either for success later on in life or for failure later on in life. And in the ICU, I see this all the time. I see this as because I will sometimes round in the ICU, and sometimes I got to put a chest tube. And, I got to intubate people, and all kinds of stuff. Coding people, but these are people who are in the last few decades of their life, and they've made some pretty poor decisions a lot of the times, and they would give anything to go back and change it, right? But it's it's almost too late. It's likely too late for many or most of those people who are in the ICU. So if you don't want to be those people, this is your episode, right? This is really something that you guys need to be taking notes on and then putting into practice. Right, what we're going to talk about. And so let's get into it. The first thing that I'd like to talk about, and I have some show notes that I've been writing down. The things that we're going to talk about is protein timing and muscle protein synthesis, protein types, and then we're going to talk about exercise and its role in reversing your biological clock. All right. And it's really cool. Some of the studies that are coming out, that are showing that that's exactly what's happening, So anyway, let's get into it. The idea when it comes to protein timing and muscle protein synthesis, boosting muscle. The idea is after resistance training, you may or may not have a specific window of an opportunity to maximize protein uptake into the skeletal muscle that will help stimulate or help grow more muscle, right? Stimulate muscle protein synthesis and grow more muscle. And so in the type of protein, fast digesting versus slow digesting, the amino acid content, preferably leucine rich with fast acting proteins. And then the timing of ingestion are all thought to modulate how effectively you build and retain muscle, right? And so let's talk about the types of protein first. We have slow acting protein, which would be a casein. Casein is a milk protein, but has a very long chain of amino acids, longer than whey protein. Whey protein is a fast acting protein. All right. And it works very quickly. And then there's other proteins. There's other protein sources, which are like vegetarian protein sources, which are also great. There's plenty of studies that show that the amino acid profile in many of the vegetarian proteins induce just as much, if not the same amount of muscle protein synthesis. You have to have maybe more of it, but you can still get the same results using a vegetarian protein. However, I do not prefer those for myself. And so I do use both whey protein, whey isolate protein, which is the most absorbable. And then I do use a casein protein, but I use them at different times, and that matters. And so I'll go into that. So whey is a fast acting protein, fast digesting protein, and it's really, really high in leucine. And you always want to make sure that your whey protein isolate, if you're going to use that, is really leucine rich, right? Because that's going to activate the mTOR pathway, which is the growth path. There's three major metabolic pathways, which I've talked about in other episodes, and that would be your AMPK pathway, your mTOR pathway, and then your sirtuins, right? And so the mTOR pathway is very heavily implicated in growth. And so if you want to activate that growth pathway, leucine does it really well. And so, so how does this all work? So there's been some really cool studies on casein, but I want to first talk about whey protein isolate. So whey protein isolate, and I'm not going to tell you which one I specifically use, although there is one of my favorites. I'm gonna remain non-biased, right? I'm just gonna say whey protein isolate is great immediately after a workout, but you do have some time throughout the day. A lot of the studies are showing that really it's your overall total amount of protein that you're receiving in a day. However, there have been some studies that show that timing can play a big role. And let's talk about one study involving casein. And so again, most people go for protein. Most people go for the whey protein isolate, which is great. That's what I've always used. But I do use casein protein at night. And I'll tell you why in just a second. This study kind of just reiterates why it's important to do that. And it really verified or validated what I was doing for the longest time. And so I'm really happy about this. And so I actually printed up the study. And so let's see. Pre-sleep protein. Let me just find the right one because I want to make sure we start with the right one. Casein protein, also called slow. This is the Journal of Physical Activity and Nutrition. Consequently, casein protein is called slow protein and whey protein is called fast protein. In fact, according to the results of a recent study, the ingestion of whey or casein protein after exercise showed different peak time patterns. And so with whey protein, peaked 60 minutes after exercise, and casein protein peaked 120 minutes after exercise. And that's, again, because casein is just a long-acting protein. It takes more work and more time to break that one down. Another study reported that muscle protein synthesis was increased by 3.5 hours after whey protein ingestion, whereas muscle protein synthesis was increased for up to 6 hours after casein protein ingestion. That's really interesting, isn't it? Several studies have reported that pre-sleep casein protein intake could have positive effects on post-exercise recovery. A study involving healthy young men showed that 40 grams of casein protein ingested 30 minutes before sleep following resistance training was digested and absorbed well during sleep. Additionally, their circulating amino acid levels increased rapidly, resulting in increased whole body protein muscle synthesis or muscle protein synthesis rates and improved protein balance, inducing positive effects on muscle recovery. Isn't that neat? Here's another one. A recent study involving English soccer players found that ingestion of 40 grams of casein protein 30 minutes before sleep after a competitive match had positive effects on counter movement jump recovery and reactive strength index recovery at 12 and 36 hours after the match. Further, muscle soreness measured by the visual analog scale was also significantly reduced in 12 hours after a match compared to the control group. Pretty cool. The ingestion of 40 grams of pre-sleep casein protein increased plasma amino acid availability more significantly over a longer period of time compared to the ingestion of 20 grams of pre-sleep casein protein. So there was a few studies where they actually did not see any great results with casein taken right before bed, but it was because the amount was less than 40 grams. And most of the time it was 30 grams or 20 grams. And there was not that big response. There was another study of casein in an elderly population that showed if you will ingest 40 grams of casein before bed, 30 minutes before bed, that increased muscle protein synthesis in these seniors by 22%. And this is really important, right? Because as you age, it is harder to build muscle. It gets so hard to build muscle because there's a lot of things that are against you as you age, right? You don't have enough growth hormone, right? You lose growth hormone in your 50s, apparently. I've heard this. I'm just echoing something that I've heard. I've not verified or fact checked it, but I do know that over time, your growth hormone supply is declining, right? But I've heard that it's the amount of growth hormone that you produce in your 50s is about half of what you produced in your 20s, right? And so that's one thing going against you. For men, well, and women, we're not really doing well on the testosterone levels as we age. Our testosterone production declines pretty rapidly after 40. And yeah, so we also have ATP issues because our mitochondria are not as efficient as they used to be. And we have this chronic low grade inflammation that's always going on because of the senescent cells that are produced by these terribly working mitochondria. I mean, the world is against us as we age, and so one of the things that we can do to help boost muscle protein synthesis as we age is take 40 grams of casein protein 30 minutes before bed, and that's pretty awesome. And that doesn't mean that that's all you need to take in as far as, the type of protein. I honestly think you should be strategic. Use whey protein isolate after you work out, or even if it's first thing in the morning. If you maybe you don't like to eat, maybe you like to have like a protein shake or something, or a smoothie, use the whey protein isolate. Protein does three things really, really good. And so what are those? Well, first, they either preserve or build muscle, so protein either preserves or build muscle. And this is particularly important in people who are taking GLP-1 medications, because these are the shots that cause astounding weight loss. You take one shot a week, like semaglutide, tirzepatide, retatrutide. These medications work really, really great. But what we're seeing is up to 2% of the weight that is lost using these medications is found to be muscle. And so, that's one thing. You don't want to lose muscle. So this is why I think it's important to get, a body composition scan before, during, and after a weight loss program. And we do that at our clinic. My clinic, I think it's super important to check body composition. And we do that pretty free, at least twice a year, but some people we do, every quarter or sometimes every month. I think it's super important, because how are you going to trend, or how are you going to know what you're doing? But if you stand on a scale and it's not moving, but you're putting in all this work, you could be building muscle too. So, it's really important to know what's going on under the hood as you try to optimize your health and fitness. And so this is just another tool in the bag, right? So yeah. So anyway, take fast acting protein throughout the day. Before you go to bed, casein protein, a long chained protein. But I'm sorry. And so back to what I was saying, protein does three things really, really good. The first one is to build or preserve muscle. The second one is that it satiates you. Protein is highly satiating. And there's been a few studies that I've read that show that, the higher protein intake you get earlier in the morning, let's say for breakfast, the less you'll eat throughout the day, because you just don't feel as hungry. And protein is the culprit, right? And so build or retain muscle. It helps to satiate you. And then the third thing is protein increases the thermogenic effect of your food. So protein has about a 30% thermogenic effect, more so than carbs, more so than fats, and which means that your body is burning more calories while you're breaking down this protein. So I would suggest, based on what we've just read, what I've just read you about casein protein, because it takes longer to break down, I'm wondering if you're burning calories for longer, right? Instead of the whey protein, which is a fast digesting protein. That would be a great study. And there's probably a study out there like that. I just haven't thought of it until just this second. Anyway, so protein is super important. And if you're not prioritizing your protein, my gosh, you got to do it, right? Again, how do you want your last few decades to last, right? How do you want them to be? Do you want to be, doing all those adventurous things? You got to build muscle. You got to take in protein. And this is one of the macros, one of the three macronutrients that people just aren't hitting the requisite amount. And so how do you calculate the amount of protein in a day that you need to be taking? This is how I do it. Now I've seen some people say it's 0.8 to 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now I prefer 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass to preserve muscle. But if you want to build muscle, it's 1 gram to 1.3 grams per pound of lean body mass. Okay. And so let me say it again. So 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of lean body mass to preserve muscle, or 1 gram up to 1.3 grams per pound of lean body mass to build muscle. All right. So let's see. There was another study that I printed out that I thought was really cool. Well, yeah, the leucine component of whey protein is super important, right? You want to make sure that you have a high leucine profile. Leucine is likely the most influential amino acid concerning skeletal muscle protein synthesis. Amino acids, especially leucine, stimulate the secretion of insulin from the pancreatic beta cells. The liver lacks branch chain aminotransferases and therefore lacks the ability to significantly oxidize branch chain amino acids, including leucine. So, consumption of branched chain amino acids leads to elevated leucine levels, reaching peripheral tissues, including skeletal muscle. And then leucine directly stimulates mTOR, and I mentioned that, as well as indirectly stimulating mTOR through its promotion of the insulin cascade. There was a study by the Tipson et al. Finding that whey protein greatly increases plasma and intramuscular leucine, which may explain the potential anabolic effect of whey consumption. Whey protein consumption elevates leucine. Leucine directly and indirectly stimulates protein synthesis through mTOR. Pretty cool. And so I hope you guys are getting that. That timing of protein intake may not be as important as the types of protein that you use. The anabolic window is what they call it, right? Around training has been heavily marketed. But there's been a lot of recent studies, a lot of recent meta-analyses, which are a collection of studies that show total daily protein intake matters more than the timing that you eat that protein, except in the case of eating a long digesting or a slow digesting protein at night, 30 minutes before bed. One older meta study concluded that timing around workouts may not be as critical as once you have adequate total intake overall. So, let's see. So, some of the key things that I want, the key drivers, the things I want you to take home: fast versus slow proteins. Whey peaks quickly. Casein provides sustained amino acids. Now casein, you may wonder, does it have the leucine part, right? Are you seeing spikes in leucine? You're not. You are seeing spikes in phenylalanine, and so although leucine is really pivotal in that insulin cascade, and so directly and indirectly activating mTOR through just leucine doing its thing, and then causing that cascade, the insulin cascade also. The casein protein, despite not having a leucine-rich amino acid profile, still has all the essential amino acids that you need to build muscle. And we do see a very high spike in phenylalanine that apparently has something to do with muscle protein synthesis. Pre-sleep protein, casein or whey, as a smart bonus strategy if done during a PM workout. So if you worked out in the evening, then you can either do either or, right? But I mean, if you're going to get the most, just like I mentioned, the casein protein continued muscle protein synthesis within like 6 hours, whereas the whey was only, I think it was 3 hours. And so you have longer muscle protein synthesis activation with the casein. So, at night, even if you worked out at night, I'd probably prefer doing the casein. I usually work out in the morning or the afternoon, never in the evening. There is some timing considerations. Like if you're your chronotype, I don't know if you know what a chronotype is, but your chronotype is the optimal rhythm, your circadian rhythm as it pertains to your optimal sleep time and awake time. This is your chronotype. And I'm like a night owl, right? So you have these early birds and you have these night owls. And I've found this out using my Oura ring, right? And I found out what my chronotype was. And it says that my optimal circadian rhythm, they didn't tell me this until it monitored my biometrics for like 3 months. And after 3 months, it spit out this information on what type of person I am pertaining to chronotypes, right? Chronotypology. And what it showed is that my optimal sleep schedule is from 12 midnight to 8 in the morning, And so if I will sleep during that time and I adjust my daily rhythm to that time, that I will perform better, I will feel better, and I'll have better outcomes throughout the day in all areas of my life, which is really cool. And so there are some studies that show that if you work out according to your chronotype, that you can have better results. However, because I'm a late owl, I still don't want to work out late. But I do notice that when I work out later in the day rather than first thing in the morning, I do have a much more productive workout. And so that might be something you may want to consider. Discovering, if you know what your chronotype is and then adjusting your workouts to your chronotype, your circadian rhythms, you may see that you have a better workout. So let's switch gears here. I mean, we've been wrapping on this subject for a bit. So let's switch gears. I'd like to discuss how exercise can slow your biological clock, okay? AKA your epigenetic age. So let's talk first. What is epigenetics? Think of your DNA as like an instruction manual for your body, right? We all have DNA. It's in the nucleus of every one of our cells. And so DNA is the instruction manual for your body. All the recipes that make you who you are determined by your DNA. Now, epigenetics is like the highlighter in the sticky notes, right? I hope that makes sense. And that tells your body which pages to read and which to skip, okay? So your environment, habits, lifestyle, things like sleep, stress, food, exercise, and even relationships can all add or remove those little notes, turning genes on or off without changing your DNA, right? So the DNA is not changing, but the genes are being turned on and off depending on all those factors that I just mentioned. So while your DNA is the same from birth to death, your epigenetic marks can change, and it can change daily depending on your lifestyle, right? And so that's why two people of the same genes, like twins, can vary. It can age very differently. All right. So, so I guess you put it like this. Your genes, they load the gun. All right. But your lifestyle pulls the trigger, and that's your epigenetics in action. All right. All right. So now we know what epigenetics is, let's talk about what epigenetic clock is versus your chronological age. Okay. So your chronological age is how many birthdays you had. All right. It's the number of years you've been around. All right. Your epigenetic age, though, is how your cells and tissues act and look inside your body. Okay. And so scientists measure this by looking at chemical tags on your DNA called methylation marks. All right. So methylation marks, DNA methylation, you can turn that on or off, right? Depending on your lifestyle. So you think of these little marks as like little stickets, or Post-its, right? So little sticky notes, and they're stuck to your genetic code. Over time, your lifestyle, like your sleep, stress, diet, exercise, even relationships, like I mentioned, can add or remove these notes, changing which of those genes are turned on and off. Okay, so when scientists measure your pattern of DNA methylation, they can estimate your biological age, basically how fast you're aging on cellular or molecular level, right? So while your driver's license might say you're 45, your epigenetic clock may say that your cells are like maybe 38, or maybe 55. It depends on how well you're taking care of yourself, okay? And so, you might be listening and thinking, okay, well, I mean, there's just one epigenetic clock, or is there a lot of different epigenetic clocks, or is there a standardized epigenetic clock? Is the same for me, the same for somebody in Europe? I mean, who knows, right? Well, so they're really not exactly, right? So let's just start over. So there isn't just one epigenetic clock that everybody uses, okay? There's lots of different ones that are used by lots of different scientists, and several different scientists have come up with their own epigenetic clocks depending on what metrics they're looking at, right? Let me go through some. So each clock tries to predict how biologically old someone is based on the patterns of DNA methylation, right? Those chemical tags we mentioned earlier that stick to DNA, which gives us, that turns our genes on or off. And so the first and most famous clock, genetic clock, was created by Dr. Stephen Horvath in 2013. This is often called the Horvath clock. So it looks at 353 different methylation sites across your genome. And then it uses information to estimate biological age very accurately across many tissues. And since then, other clocks have been developed, right? And so you have the Hannum clock, which is based on blood cells only. The PhenoAge estimates risk of disease and lifespan. The Grimm age predicts mortality risk using DNA methylation patterns like smoking, inflammation, and other aging markers. And then the Dunedin pace clock measures the pace of aging rather than the total age. And so what scientists look at to determine epigenetic age is not just one thing. They look at hundreds of things throughout all your DNA sites. And these are called CPG sites, or cytosine phosphate guanine sites. And at each site, you have a small chemical group called a methyl group, and it can attach to DNA, and the pattern of which sites are methylated and which aren't tells scientists which genes are on or off, how much your cells resemble a younger or older pattern. And then by comparing your methylation patterns to huge databases, what is that? The DNA Ancestry.com. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're selling all that information to companies like this or to people who are trying to do studies, But by comparing your methylation patterns in these huge databases of DNA of all these people, known ages, scientists can calculate your epigenetic age and whether you're aging faster or slower than normal. And so regular structured exercise is more than a health habit. It can literally shift your biological age. You consider exercise as a geroprotector, right? A geroprotector is a tool to protect or perhaps rewind aspects of aging at the molecular level. And so for best effect, you want to combine resistance training plus aerobic training, right? And then you got to train regularly. You got to be consistent in all this. You can't just train, one day a week or one day every other week or 2 days every other week and then expect, to see big changes, right? You can't do these. You can't train sporadically. And so, there's a phrase that says you're only as old as your epigenome says you are, right? Well, this is real. There's real science behind that, And so you don't want to rely on one big workout now and then, all right? It just goes back to that what I just said. You don't want to work out just a couple times every other week, right? Consistency. Aging well is partly about training your molecular self, not just your muscles, all right? And so I just wanted you guys I wanted to touch on this because we're learning more and more and more. Just like the epigenetic clock by Dr. Horth came out in 2013. That's like 12 years ago, right? Before that, we didn't have one because now people are looking at longevity. They're looking at how do we postpone the inevitability, and there's health span and lifespan. Lifespan is the number of years. Health span is the quality of life and health in those years. And so now we're looking to increase not only health span, but lifespan. And so one of the ways that you can do that is consistently exercise, consistently work out, build muscle. If you look at grip strength tests, there's some really good studies that show that a weak grip strength directly correlates with an increased risk of all-cause mortality, which is death from any disease or non-disease. And this is because the grip strength is a great representation of your overall strength, total body strength. And so this is why also in our clinic, we will check grip strength tests on all new patients because this is a metric that we can trend. And I have a very, very big, huge predilection of getting people stronger. And because I know the studies, I've seen the research, people live longer, healthier, more active, more vibrant lives, more happy lives, the more muscle mass they have and the more active they are. And so these things are super important. So consider that. And I think that's about it. I think that's all we're going to talk about today. We're looking at 34 minutes. So so let's tie this off and then we'll come back next week and we'll talk about some other cool stuff. I have actually a whole calendar for the whole next month of topics that I'm really excited to talk about on the Longevity Game podcast. If you ever want to pose a question to the Longevity Game podcast, you have any questions or concerns, or you want to touch base on a topic that we discussed in one of our episodes, you can always reach us or email us at hello@thelongevitygamepodcast.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, then just email us at beaguest@thelongevitygamepodcast.com. If you're interested in sponsoring or supporting the show, email us at sponsors, plural, sponsors at thelongevitygamepodcast.com. And so if you're enjoying the content, smash that subscribe button and then give us a like and share this video. And thanks, friends, for joining us today. We are out. I should also mention that you can find me on TikTok under Michael Ward NP. You can find me on Facebook at Michael Ward NP. You can find me on Instagram at Michael Ward NP. And you can hit me up there in my DMs. We can always talk about stuff if you have some questions, some comments, and other things too. Also, leave me some comments below. I'd love to chat with you. I'm always in the comments. All right, guys, take care. We are out.